Optimizing existing content is quite a bit different from planning new content, and by now we've learned why that is. Intent will often dictate what the content ends up being, and that makes sense if you think about your content as like a product. It sort of is, right? Content sort of is a product that we're trying to promote, trying to get in front of people. So think about if you had this amazing product, but it just had the worst packaging ever, and it was totally being promoted to the wrong market, but it was still an epic product, and it just needed a few changes to make it take off. And if that's all that was holding that product back, and you made those changes, then it probably would take off. So contrast that to having a terrible product. You can dress that product up as much as you want. You can have the greatest marketing in the world. You can get the target market exactly right, but it'll still be a heck of a lot harder to sell enough of that product. At the end of the day, if someone wants a flight comparison app, then it doesn't matter how awesome a blog post you write is. It doesn't matter how well you optimize that blog post or how much money you put behind promoting it. If the competition all has travel comparison apps and you don't, and that's what people want, then you're not going to rank. And so because of that, if you're starting with content that's already been created and you're trying to optimize it after the fact, then you'll be limited with what you can do. But still, it can be better than doing nothing at all. It's just that you'll always do better incorporating SEO thinking into the content planning phases. So the difference between optimizing existing content and planning new content is this. With new content, the process we've covered from a really high level looks like this. So when planning new content, you're starting by identifying your audience and then figuring out what they're searching. When you're optimizing existing content, and by existing content here, we mean content that already exists, obviously, but also content that's already been planned. You know, like the direction of the content is basically already set and you can't totally change it. So with existing content, the process is sort of reversed. Instead of starting with your target audience and figuring out what intent they have and hence what they're searching, you have to start with the existing content, figure out what intent that content is serving, and then figure out if your audience even has that intent in the first place. Because with existing content that wasn't planned for search in mind, it's very often not a great match for what an audience might search in the first place. So let's talk through each step here. The first thing you have to figure out is what is the content about? Like what need is it meeting? In other words, what intent is it serving? We're basically working backwards on intent here. So if we were planning new content, we'd start by figuring out what intent our audience might have, and then we'd create content to meet that intent. In this case, optimizing existing content, in this case, the content already exists. It's already been created. So we basically have to ask ourselves, if I were looking for this content, what would I search? And what need would I be trying to fill? What would my intent be? In other words, we're thinking about the what from our 5 W's here. What intent would someone have? And what would they search to find this content? So once we have that, we need to think about whether our target audience even has that intent in the first place. In other words, we need to think about the who in our 5 W's. Who has this intent? Who is searching that topic? And is there overlap with our target audience? So this is a good high-level look at the process of optimizing existing content so we can compare it to the different process of planning new content. But here's a much more detailed flowchart to help you with this process. And I'll add this as a download to the next lesson. So let's imagine we're this remodeling company from the previous chapter, and we already had a blog post about the best remodeling tools for things like floor planning and blueprints and design and stuff like that. And we wanted to optimize that piece of existing content. So there's our intent, this first step up here, and that's to find remodeling tools. And we could just use remodeling tools as our topic here. We could also get more specific if the content was about something more specific like floor planning tools or design tools. But let's just call this one a general article about all kinds of remodeling tools. Okay, so the next question is, would anyone search this? Like, is this even something someone might go and search for at all? Any audience? Obviously, we don't want to spend time optimizing content for search if it's not really something someone would search for in the first place. And that's this step right here. Okay, so assuming we think somebody would search this, the next question is, would our target audience search this? In other words, if we're thinking about the entire audience of people searching for this topic, do we think there's a good bit of overlap with our target audience? Are they represented in there? And ideally to a fairly high degree. So for example, if we're this remodeling company and we're only trying to create content for our target customer, In the previous chapter, we decided that our target customer is probably not looking for tools. It's probably just the DIYers and the pros looking for tools. And so that piece of content, remodeling tools, it fails this test of would our target audience search this topic. Yes, somebody would search it. I'm sure somebody's out there searching remodeling tools, but our target audience would probably not be searching that. And so if this is the case, if we only want to create content for our target customer, then we'd probably just skip optimizing this blog post entirely because it would largely be a waste of time. So let's say that wasn't the case. Let's say we were actually going after like the DIYers or the pros and we think our target audience would search this. So we answer yes to that question. Next, we need to think about whether it's reasonable that we can win. In other words, looking at what's ranking, their EAT, brand awareness, and how well they're meeting intent. Do we think we can realistically rank for this topic? Now, this doesn't necessarily rule out the content. You can still optimize it, and then later, when you've caught up to the ranking competition, it'll start to do better. But if you were prioritizing this work, I wouldn't prioritize optimizing a topic that you can't win on for, say, a year or more over content that you could win on today. And we've seen in previous chapters how we can use EAT and we can use brand awareness and we can use intent to really quickly get a read on how competitive those search results are. So we need to be honest with ourselves about this question, ask, can we actually win? And if so, then we can go on to optimize the content. So you make whatever changes you can make to the content to try to get it closer to meeting that intent that you identified earlier. So if this is a text article, for example, that usually means you update the page title, the title tag, you maybe even make some slight tweaks to the content itself if that's possible. That's the minimum, really. If you have more control, you could completely revamp the content or change its direction a little bit. Sometimes it just takes a slight change in direction to get an existing piece of content to meet the intent of your target topic, your target keyword. But at the very least, if you don't do anything else, you'd probably want to update the title tag, which is what somebody's going to see in the search results when they search for this. Okay, so that's the process. Next, we'll talk about the major challenges you'll run into when optimizing existing content. And then we'll run through some examples after that, walk through this flowchart so you can see how it's done.